Welcome back to the afternoon session of this 10th Ukrainian Symposium. And we're going to begin this afternoon session by welcoming two distinguished speakers from Ukraine, Zvenyslava Kechur and Roman Kechur. They'll come and join me on the screen.
Вітаю.
Hello, Zvenyslava. How lovely to see you and to meet with you through this symposium. Of course, I've come to know Roman well because we're colleagues in the Alliance organizing these symposiums, but it's the first time that I'm meeting you. So welcome to our symposium. Thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon and giving us a presentation. So I will introduce both of you and then hand over to you. So Zvenyslava and Roman will give a presentation with the title Fate, Neurosis and the Path to Freedom. And Zvenyslava is a doctor, psychotherapist, training therapist and supervisor with the European Confederation of Psychoanalytic and Psychodynamic Psychotherapies. She's also a psychoanalyst of the Ukrainian Psychoanalytic Society and editor of articles and books on psychoanalysis. And Roman is head of the Department of Psychology and Psychotherapy at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. He's a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, teaching therapist, and supervisor in the Ukrainian Union of Psychotherapists and the European Confederation of Psychoanalytic and Psychodynamic Psychotherapies. So we look forward very much to your presentation. Thank you.
Dear Patricia, thanks a lot for introducing me, and I would like to express my gratitude, and particularly for inviting me today for this wonderful opportunity to join this amazing topic, an important topic, probably not only for me and my family, but all our people and nation. That we have the opportunity to see how important it is based on recent events in the world. When I received this offer to share my reflections on freedom, I was moved, as I consider this topic to be still subtle in my personal history, the narratives of my patients, and the experience of my country. And now when Ukraine is defending its right for freedom and independence in such a ruthless, brutal war, once again, I still do not know what price my nation will pay for this undeniable and even a little trivial in the eyes of European values. I would like to have my text on the screen right now, apart from the clinical part. I will try to do this now for you to perceive this easier, because I have lots of material. Do you see this? Do you see my text, dear colleagues?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So I will start the presentation with the words of the Italian thinker of the Renaissance speech, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, from his speech for human dignity. We have given you, O Adam, no visage proper to yourself, nor any endowment properly own, in order that whatever place, whatever form, whatever gifts you may, with premeditation, select the same you may have and possess for your own judgment and decision. You, by contrast, impeded by no such restrictions, may, by your own free will, to whose custody we have assigned you, trace for yourself the alignments of your own nature. The notion of freedom has been explored for centuries by philosophers, historians, political scientists, psychoanalysts. It is still undergoing significant transformations. Thus, when one begins a discussion of this subject, it is always a challenge, or as Hannah Arendt wrote, it is even something hopeless. It is as though age-old contradictions and antinomies were lying in wait to force the mind into dilemmas of logical impossibility, so that it becomes as impossible to conceive of freedom or its opposite as it is to realize the notion of a square circle. Thus, in order not to drown in the thickets of philosophy, theology, linguistics, or logic, I will follow my own conscious and intuitive observations, associations, experiences, and feelings, which have been assisting me since the very beginning of my life. My parents belonged to the so-called Shizdesyatniki. the generation of Ukrainian Soviet intelligentsia who had a strong civic awareness and got the greatest chance to speak at the beginning of the 1960s due to the weakening of the communist totalitarianism. This group created a moral opposition to the USSR's totalitarian regime. Many young people among them were brave and radical enough to support and develop seeds of freedom, which appeared at that time in all areas of cultural and political life. I think they were brave but also reckless. As we now know, the so-called Khrushchev thaw did not last long, and after such events as removal of Nikita Khrushchev in 1964, suppression of the Prague Spring in 1968, the creative, liberal, and democratic intelligentsia became one of major obstacles on the way to totalitarianism restoration. In 1965-1972, many Ukrainian historians, poets, writers, artists, translators, and philosophers were subjected to repressions through arrest, homicide, deportation, a blacklisted, layoff, etc. They were pushed into the spiritual underground. Thus, I grew up in the USSR in the atmosphere of spiritual underground, and when I came of age, when I was 18, I already expected, the same as many of my peers, that, just as the Ukrainian writer Taras Prochaska put it, the scenery would collapse very soon, that I would be able to choose an interesting life in order to accelerate the decay. So, hence, no one was surprised when on the 2nd of October 1990, the next generation of students went to the then square of the October Revolution to launch the first protest rally called Revolution on Granite, a student hunger strike, which became one of the forerunners of the collapse of the Soviet Union. On this occasion, students put forward 5 postulates, 5 demands, preventing the signing of the new contract of the Union, new election of the Supreme Council of the Ukrainian SSSR according to the multi-party system, non-participation of Ukrainian soldiers in wars taking place on alien territories, nationalization of the property of the Communist Party of Ukraine and Leninist Young Communist League, resignation of the chairman of the Council of Ministers, Vitaly Masol. These postulates were accepted by the Supreme Council of Ukraine on October 17th, and the hunger strike ended on October 18th. What was it? I often ask myself. Bravery or recklessness? Probably both. Well-known Ukrainian philosopher from Lviv, Andrei Dakhny, wrote, growing up in a free society is something very different from growing up in the society which is totalitarian. If the society has a history of unfreedom, then you experience the passage from unfreedom to freedom in a very specific way, existential way. I spent half of my life in the Soviet Union, and I personally know very well what unfreedom is and what it is like to enter the social and civic freedom. In order to continue this genealogical line of writing in a logical way, I will mention one of our favorite family stories that took place in 2004 during the Orange Revolution. The children of our friends were fiercely arguing about whether camels with one hump existed. And the 5-year-old boy ended the argument with a pathetic statement, then we'll arrange a mass meeting in the kindergarten and we'll prove that some camels do have one hump. And 10 years later, the 17-year-old sister of that boy wrote, when I grew up, Mom told me in one of our talks that the modern young generation probably does not understand and value own freedom, freedom of speech, choice, action. I thought it over for a moment and tried to object, but that was then, and now I wouldn't. November 30, 2013, the beating of students, indignation, anger, and non-understanding. February 18, 2014, Barkut attacked the Maidan. More than 30 persons perished, hundreds were brutally beaten. February 19, the Verkhovna Rada did not gather the majority to officially condemn the violence. February 22-23, more than 80 people killed, hundreds tortured and missing. March 18, annexation of the Crimea by the Russian Federation. April 2014, invasion of Russian troops into the Ukrainian territory, beginning of ATO, tens of killed and hundreds of wounded Ukrainian servicemen. Today, the neighboring state is encroaching on our integrity, independence, and freedom, the value of which is now known to us. This winter, a moment came for the whole people that changed everything. The worldview, goals, ourselves. The end of quotation. 10 years, 12 years have elapsed since then. And now these words have a different price and a special value for the generation of parents of those children. It is worth voicing the ideals of early humanism, in order that you may, as the free and proud shaper of your own being, fashion yourself in the form you may prefer. It will be in your power to descend to the lower, brutish forms of life, you will be able, through your own decision, to rise again to the superior orders, whose life is divine. What determines a particular choice of a person or a society? Social myths create various social matrices that establish proper conditions for the development of a totalitarian or democratic style of interaction. The tradition of efficient flight with lawlessness sustains the hope and the readiness for self-limitation, and thereby the awareness of one's knowledge limitations. It sustains the sense of one's strength and self-confidence. Failures in this fight inevitably activate totalitarian myths that influence reality and lead to cross-generational trauma. In American psychoanalyst with Irish roots, Michael O'Loughlin, in his paper Cultural Ruptures and Their Consequences for Mental Health Across Generations, refers to the history of Ireland and asks, what happens to the populace who not only suffered catastrophic losses as a result of hunger and ill treatment, but also lost its indigenous language and its ethnic heritage, which included its encoded cultural identity, memory of ancestors, loss, and suffering? If these losses remain alive, what happens to the pain? And if the pain becomes repressed, can it turn into insanity? And can the defense against it take the form of depression or some other severe mental symptom, which is going to appear much later? I repeatedly encountered similar reflections in my psychoanalytic practice, and now I would like to share some of my observations about one of such clinical stories. At the beginning of this treatment, I had a great hope that work with this patient will ultimately reflect the idea expressed by the Polish theologian, philosopher, publicist, and the first chaplain of Solidarity, Józef Stanislav, in 1995. Freedom does not get inside a human being as a result of reading books. Freedom comes after one meets the other free human being. When a slave meets a free man, he starts to hate him for his freedom, or he becomes free himself. I would like to ask Martinez now to switch off the... Thank you. This dignity, non-indifference, the right to freely choose one's internal position and its external representation, free choice of one's style of living, creativity and openness for other senses, all these things constitute my understanding of freedom. And internal freedom is more important than external one. These are words of a man who was raised and shaped in the Soviet system and who spent some time working in post-Soviet local government, but at the same time never concealed his libertarian position, as a result of which he took part in Euromaidan in Donetsk. His pro-Ukrainian position resulted in his capturing by terrorists from Ordlo, the occupied part of Donbass, on January 27, 2016, who kept him captive for about 2 years and where they tortured him repeatedly in cruel ways. I have my own senses of living further, going ahead. In my opinion, it is senses that turn a simple biological will into human freedom. This is necessary path from the reflective longing for freedom to the reflective experience of meaningful freedom of an individual who is responsible for his own freedom, not only to himself, but also to other human beings. This is what Ihor Kozlovsky wrote after he was released on December 27, 2017. When thinking about the history of these two individuals who represent two different generations but come from apparently similar cultural backgrounds, I ask myself, why have they developed so different mental matrices? What created conditions for creating a libertarian self-awareness in one of them, and what obstacles appeared on the way to development for my patient? Ihor Kozlovsky, when reflecting on such issues and analyzing the impact of totalitarianism and conformism on personality development, wrote that a totalitarian system creates and controls the order at the expense of killing the spirit, dulling the heart, and devastating the life. In his opinion, totalitarianism puts limits on humans from the top to down, and conformism is something a man gets used to from the bottom up when he loses his will and creativity. Conformism gets a man trapped by way of fearing the system, self-deception, and conscious or unconscious lie, in mass consciousness and stereotypes of opportunism. During my work with Anastasia, I used to encounter fear, power, and dulling the heart, not only in her, but also in myself. And no matter how much I longed to feel free next to my unfree patient, I eventually realized that it was just an attempt to maintain control over the sense of helplessness and loneliness in our weak efforts to get out of the trap of unfreedom. Where and how does each of us encounter or lose his or her chances for freedom? Who knows? Maybe the fact that Roman Keys actually wrote, a philosopher and linguist poet, If he referred to Hannah Arendt's essay, What is Freedom? And wrote that neither freedom nor action is possible if human acts are not attached any sense to. Thus, both freedom and action are mediated by sensokinesis. This internal dialogue with oneself, as well as an order that a human being gives for himself, require not just the will, but the courage to challenge those unconquerable circumstances, which can paralyze the will as well. He wrote in his essay Freedom and Movement of Meanings, which was published in an online daily journal, Spruch. He also outlines important points which can limit one's freedom, our experience and gathered knowledge, cognitive limitation of structures of speech in the attempts to express nonverbal reality, excessive heterogeneity and diversity of themes, the dominance of we or we I, conformism and fanatism, excessive regression and so-called return to the womb. Those perhaps not new but well-formulated ideas help me to understand my patient and millions of other people for whom the idea of freedom and the path to it still remains rather illusory and painful. In any case, it is always about the right to choose one's own degree of freedom, which results from the ethical compromises between oneself and the world and determines the share of responsibility for one's own actions and sense development. Francis Fukuyama, in his Financial Times article, Putin's War on the Liberal Order, he wrote, liberalism has been under assault for some time, both from the left and from the right. Freedom House, in its 2022 paper, Freedom in the World, emphasizes that the level of global freedom has been decreasing for 16 years, not only as a result of the development of authoritarian countries such as Russia and China, but also as a result of a shift toward populism, negation of liberalism and nationalism in countries which have had long-lasting liberal democracies, such as the United States and India. I have to make my speech a little bit shorter. So millions of temporarily displaced Ukrainians are staying in the ranks thanks to the psychological strategy, thanks to all non-indifferent people from the whole world who have created for us and still maintain the possibility to oppose the enemy mentally. It is difficult to overestimate what the world is doing now for Ukraine. Since today it is essential to have somebody who can tolerate and share our unspoken horrors of threats, losses, and loneliness. This war is still going on, but I believe in our shared victory. And I hope that each of us will preserve in ourselves a spirit of freedom, not only to fight, but also to live. Thank you for attention. Now I would like to offer Roman to join us with his part of the speech.
Вітаю, колеги. Я зараз спробую зробити такий, можливо, теоретичний коментар.
I'm going to have one theoretical comment. First of all, I'm really grateful to Zvenka for this material that she provided with the discussions that we had around this material. I also would like to express my gratitude to famous intellectual Rusdrul, who has been discussing with me for pretty long time already on similar topics. And certain thoughts that I'm going to present today, I will definitely be, I cannot even identify whether they belong to me or him or both of us. I will try to share my presentation now. So I will start my speech with this, I would say, a little historic tour for us to think that lots of people before us in a different language than ours tried to understand and to give the answer to this question, how people can learn something. So Thomas Bayes said he was an English mathematician, statistician, and philosopher of the 18th century. He served as a Presbyterian minister. He conducted research on the problems of probability. His main idea was not published at all. After Bayes, he did not publish his primary idea regarding inverse probability during his lifetime. After Bayes' death, his manuscripts were edited and published by his friend, the mathematician Richard Price. Publication was called An Essay Towards Solving a Problem in the Doctrine of Chances. So his main work was in trying to understand how new information that we are receiving can change our impressions, how we can perceive new information. You will see how he was thinking about this. So he had this like formula like this, and he mentions that this PA, P, it's probability. So the probability, posterior probability, the probability that hypothesis A is true after we have learned effect B. PA, prior probability, the degree to which we believed in hypothesis A before the emergence of new data. PBA, likelihood, the probability of observing fact B if hypothesis A is indeed true. And the last one, the last symbol, marginal probability of the fact. What is meant here? I will try to translate it in normal language for us. So bias theorem is a method for updating and refining one's beliefs when new information appears. If we look at the world through the eyes of our patients, then we can say that we, in a way, psychotherapists have to become this new information for our patients. So to learn something new, we take what we already knew, add new data, and arrive at a more accurate representation of reality. In other words, the patients come with their own thoughts about realia. They meet us, and in cooperation with us, they are trying to somehow change or add something, better add something to their impression of reality. We begin with this initial assumption, hypothesis, how likely it is that something is true. For example, a traumatized person can ask this question, how likely it is, or how possible it is that there is no fairness in this world, how likely it is that trauma will be with me all my life and will constantly come back. Now, then a new fact emerges, and this new fact should be a psychotherapist, not only a psychotherapist, it can be, I don't know, a priest, a relative, friend, just a person who cares. So how does this fact change your assessment of the probability? Apart from date, I think that it's pretty famous modern concept of Carl Friston's talk about the same. It's actually based also on mathematical logic of bias. The free energy principle states to survive, any biological system must minimize prediction error. The brain is a prediction machine. It builds a model of the world and attempts to guess what will happen next. If a prediction fails, the system experiences stress. In other words, traumatized person somehow projects the repeating of the next trauma. It's appealing, it's expecting kind of to have some support and change of this factor, but at the same time says that what happened to you will happen again. There is no other reality. So we constantly have hallucinations about our world. We project it, and then we use some senses and also cognitive apparatus to keep these hallucinations within the bounds of reality. Freud, I often quote him because I believe that it's a classic essence of all psychoanalytic theory. From a letter to Wilhelm Fliess, our psychic apparatus was created through a process of stratification. Material existing in the form of memory traces is periodically reconstructed and rewritten. Memory appears not just once, but many times in succession. Subsequent memories are the psychic achievements of previous stages of life. At the borders of these stages, a transformation of psychic material occurs. In my opinion, certain traits of psychoneurosis can be explained by the absence of such transformations. The end of quotation. Freud has one more step here. He does not use this mathematical apparatus, but he says that not only our perception of the reality changes, but our perception of ourselves and our past is changing as well. So in other words, our current cooperation and psychotherapeutic cooperation as well has this aim to change, to transform our memory about the past. So we do not only change our current impression, but also our memories of the past. Interim conclusion, the psychotherapeutic process changes not only the future forecast to transference, but also the representation of the past, meaning identity. In other words, one of the aims of psychoanalytic process is to change our identity, so decrease of its traumatic pressure. In a psychoanalytic context, priority is a function of the symbolic processing of trauma. Trauma creates a prior expectation, which becomes a transference. In other words, what this phenomenon transference is this expectation, prior expectation. The totality of prior expectations, that is, the system of transference typical for an individual, constitutes identity. It was just interim conclusion. We will have some more sense steps to try to move forward. So, comparison of Bayes and Freud. Bayes provided the formula for how beliefs are updated. We have hypotheses, we get new data, we adjust hypotheses. This is a formal description of the process of learning from experience. If we imagine this process of psychotherapy, we as patients, they have some kind of hypothesis, they meet with the psychotherapists, they cooperate with psychotherapists, and then they introduce some adjustments to their previous hypothesis and form their next hypothesis. So Freud applied this logic to psychology. Symptom equals sign of a hidden cause. Interpretation means hypothesis. Session material, it's new data. So psychoanalysis in Freud's view is a constant refinement of hypotheses about the unconscious. In effect, the patient and analyst together review assumptions many times, approaching a more plausible explanation. And here I would like to stop a little bit and to add one short comment. Both Bayes and Freud describe this theory. They describe the theory of cognition. It seems to me that these steps that were made, they were made kind of, were like steps that were forming something, foundation steps, and they are explaining us how the cognition process is happening. But these steps are not enough to understand how we can transform. Robert Stolorow, the founder of intersubjectivity. There is no objective truth about the psyche. Truth is born between people. Hypotheses are formed not in the head of a single expert, but in the dialogue between two subjectivities. This is once again sending us to Franz Bernard. This is a very Bayesian approach. The representation of truth is always temporary, contextual, and constantly being refined. Bayes described the form of thinking. Freud applied it to the unconscious. Stolorow showed that this thinking always occurs between people, that it is intersubjective phenomenon. But so far, we do not have this concept of transformation. We are only in this modus of idea of cognition. The therapist's task is to become not just an other, a new fact, for the prior expectation to change into a posterior one, elaborating and developmental way. The psychotherapist must develop the capacity for their own changes. It is some kind of basic foundation idea of this speech. This hypothesis that it seems to me it requires our additional discussion. Identity is the core of subjectivity, the position, the point of view, and the source of activity from which the personality grows. Identity is the source of transference. So once again, the Bayesian prior probability. Identity is the slow-moving part of the psyche that resists change. Identity is the consequence of individual and group traumatization. It is trauma frozen in time. Here I prepared this scheme for you, this illustration, how I imagine it. It's my thoughts concerning how trauma can form identity. So trauma, like trauma processing chart. So trauma can be divided into unprocessed and processed portion of trauma. Unprocessed portion of trauma is described in this reaction fight, flight, freeze, and psychosomatic reactions. Processed portion of trauma is through symbol and ritual can create identity. Zone free from trauma can be called creativity zone, and it is not a part of identity. This experience that is not traumatic, or that experience that the personality can deal with without working on the trauma, creates or expanding creativity zone. In other words, this model presupposes such view that the person consists of identity and creativity zone. Identity consists of symbol and ritual, the trauma. Conclusion. Psychoanalytic psychotherapy, like any other, aims for changes in a person's representation of themselves and the world. Me, as psychotherapists, we have this idea, yes, that as a result, with this psychotherapy, a person's representations of themselves and the world might change. But these changes are possible only when we, in each therapy, we, as psychotherapists, ready to change ourselves. Attempting to change another without the readiness to change oneself is indoctrination, not psychotherapy. Dignity is the combination of individual freedom with deep respect for the other. And the last slide here, I tried to formulate this new hypothesis. The proposed hypothesis describes a theory of change, a transformational process aimed at reducing traumatic identity tension and expanding the creativity zone. It describes an intersubjective process of interaction between two transforming subjects rather than one person's perception of external reality. And to wrap up, I would like to say that in our point of view, we are becoming other to each other. Our patients become others to us, and we are also becoming others to our patients. So, because any kind of dignified and free, let's say, psychotherapy is free will from the side of subjects to changing under the influence of each other. It seems to me that clinical material presented by Zvenyslava was actually showing this dynamics, this trip of two women looking for some points of contact through changes that they were feeling in themselves. Thank you everyone for attention. It seems to me that we are several minutes late.
Thank you so much.
Patricia, you switched off your microphone? Yes, it's back on. Thank you.
Back on. Thank you so much. Let me just check. I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
And thank you so much to both of you for your wisdom, for bringing your clinical practice in such a powerful way into this theme of the path to freedom. And as Zvenyslava said at one point, internal freedom is more important than the external one. And I feel as though that's an important theme running through the whole of today. It began with the quotation I used from Socrates. That's what that's about. Internal freedom is the most important thing. And if it's not there, then there are internal problems that cannot be resolved. And then you've led it through, Roman, with this fantastic and powerful formula that you used from Thomas Bayes, which to think of a formula, it reduces things to its essence, and to think of such important processes within the mind, within the brain, being reduced to such a formula as that. But then you've spoken powerfully following on from it and bringing Freud in, and so opened out that transformational path to freedom, which is about the individual, and then also, as it becomes about respect and mutual respect, can become about the society as well. And so I think this is between the two of you, you've brought for us a really powerful and creative presentation, which really brings aspects of our theme to life, both for individuals in Ukraine and also for the whole society of Ukraine, thinking for the future of individuals in Ukraine and thinking for the future of the whole society within Ukraine. So thank you for this, for your wisdom, and for this very powerful presentation containing elements of great truth, which are valuable for us all.